Welcome back. This is part 2 on the Crossfire tutorial. In part 2, we're going to connect our Crossfire receiver to the flight controller. We're going to bind it to our transmitter, and we're going to upgrade the firmware. Here I have the Crossfire wired up to a Betaflight F3 board. Notice that I'm using one of the UARTs. In this case, it's UART1. You must use both TX and RX if you want to have telemetry. The pins don't necessarily matter. You can see pin 1 and pin 2 go to the RX and TX respectively. However, the pinout doesn't matter because you can reverse these and configure it in software. We'll do that later. Next, we're going to configure the transmitter. What I'm going to do is press the center button once so I get to page 1 of 13. Press the page button. And then I can scroll to the very bottom. A shortcut is I can actually scroll backwards to go up. And we're going to turn off the internal radio and turn on the external radio and set it to CRSF protocol. There's a known issue with the QX7 and Crossfire. The workaround is either to do a hardware mod or to decrease your baud rate. Without it, you'll get constant telemetry warnings. Stinger Swarm did a really good video on this, which I will link in the description. The way to work around it is to go to page 8 of 9 and then scroll down and set your baud rate to 115K. You can only do this if you're running at least 2.2.1 of the OpenTX firmware. If you've done the hardware mod, go ahead and leave this at 400K. The advantage of 400K is you get down to a theoretical 4 millisecond latency. At 115K, you get a theoretical latency of 16 milliseconds. We're now ready to bind up the transmitter with the receiver. To do this, we press this button once until the ring turns into this flashing green, which means this is in bind mode. We're now going to power up the receiver. If the receiver's never been bound before, when you plug it in, it'll automatically enter bind mode. However, this is one I've bound before, and so I have up to 1 minute to press the bind button to put it into bind mode. Notice how this has turned blue? That means that there is a firmware update available. I notice that you'll get this whether you're either upgrading or downgrading the firmware. The transmitter and the receiver should always be on the same version. So let's go ahead and press it again. It now turns green. It takes about 10 to 15 seconds before anything happens, but you'll soon see it start flashing green, which means it's updating the firmware. As soon as this is done, it will verify, and then both will turn solid green, indicating that the firmware upgrade is complete. This is arguably the most confusing part of setting up Crossfire. At this point, you might assume that you can go into Betaflight and set up your receiver tab. However, we have not yet defined which pin is the TX and which pin is the RX on the receiver. In the next video, we're going to download the Lewis scripts and I'll show you how to configure that.